The notification came in at 6:47 in the morning, while I was standing at the prep station of a restaurant I had spent 14 months rebuilding from a cash-bleeding mess into something actually worth being proud of. My hands smelled like roasted garlic and olive oil, the walk-in humming behind me, the dining room still dark, chairs still upside down on tables. And my phone lit up on the stainless steel counter with a message from my wife that I had to read 3 times before it landed. We've decided to move forward with a family-only management structure. You don't need to be involved in daily operations anymore. Her mother and I agree this is best for the business going forward. I set the phone down, picked up a towel, wiped my hands even though they were already clean, looked around at the kitchen I had redesigned, the POS system I had installed, the vendor relationships I had personally rebuilt after her mother had burned through 3 suppliers in 6 months. And I thought about the $340,000 I had quietly wired out of my own savings 18 months ago to keep this place from being foreclosed on. No contract, no equity agreement, no paperwork of any kind, just a handshake and the word family used like a legal document. I want you to know something before I go any further. I didn't walk into that kitchen that morning looking for a fight. I walked in because I genuinely loved the work. I genuinely believe we were building something together. And the moment I read that message, the thing I felt first wasn't anger, it was recognition. The slow, heavy kind that settles in your chest when you realize something you suspected for a long time has finally decided to stop hiding. My name is Calder, and this is what happened when I stopped holding up a house that was never built with my name on it. Before I tell you any of this, I want to ask one thing. If you're listening right now, drop a comment and tell me where you're tuning in from. I mean it. Stories like this are easier to tell when I know someone out there is actually hearing it. Even one name, one city, it helps more than you know. Now, here's how it started. My friend Derek had known me since college. We were both in Austin's tech scene for years, the kind of work where you stare at dashboards until midnight and convince yourself the stock options are worth it. He was the one who introduced me to my wife at a fundraiser downtown, back when she was running the front of house at her family's restaurant on South Congress, and I was 3 years into a software engineering role I was quietly exhausted by. She was sharp, funny, completely sure of herself in a room full of people trying too hard to look important. I was gone within the first conversation. Her mother had opened the restaurant 11 years earlier, an Italian-American concept. Good bones, loyal regulars, a wine list that needed serious help. Her mother ran it like a personal fiefdom, which worked fine until it stopped working. By the time my wife and I had been married for 2 years, the place was quietly dying. Supplier invoices were 90 days overdue. 2 line cooks had quit without being replaced. The POS system was a tablet propped against a napkin holder and manually reconciled in a notebook. Her mother sat across from us at the kitchen table one Sunday and said, "Calder, you understand systems. You understand money. We need you." My wife looked at me with the exact expression I didn't know how to say no to, so I said yes. I want to be specific about what I gave up and what I walked into, because the specifics matter. I left a $118,000 salary. I took no salary from the restaurant for the first 8 months because the margins wouldn't support it. I used $340,000 of my own savings, money I'd been building since my first job out of college, money I had earmarked for a property I'd been watching in East Austin, to pay off back debt, upgrade the kitchen equipment, and cover 3 months of payroll while we rebuilt the customer base. I rebuilt the entire point-of-sale infrastructure, moved inventory management to a cloud system tied to my accounts, renegotiated contracts with 4 vendors, and personally trained every front-of-house staff member on the new reservation platform. I also did something I would only realize the significance of much later. Every vendor account, every software subscription, every digital system I set up, I registered them under my personal email and my personal credit. My wife's credit score at the time made it the practical choice. Her mother agreed immediately, and nobody said a word about changing it once things stabilized. Within 10 months, the restaurant had turned its first clean profit in 4 years. Local press picked it up. Her mother gave an interview to an Austin food blog where she described herself as someone who never gave up on her vision and mentioned her daughter as a creative force behind the new direction. My name appeared once, in a parenthetical, as family support. I told myself it was fine. I was the infrastructure. Not everyone needs their name on the wall to know what they built. Derek saw it differently. Over coffee one afternoon, about a year in, he slid his phone across the table and said, Have you seen her mother's Instagram? 11 posts celebrating the restaurant's turnaround, photos of her mother in the dining room, her mother with regulars, her mother at the host stand, her mother at the bar smiling with a glass of the wine I had selected from a new distributor I had spent 3 weeks vetting. In every caption, the word I appeared, never we. I handed the phone back. I told Derek it didn't matter. He gave me the look he always gives me when he thinks I'm lying to myself, but decides not to push yet. I appreciated the restraint at the time. I understand now he was just waiting. The first real fracture came at Thanksgiving. Her mother had organized the family dinner at the restaurant, closed to the public for the night. Extended family from San Antonio, cousins, her aunt who flew in from Phoenix. I'd arranged the menu, ordered specialty ingredients, prepped the kitchen myself because I didn't want to ask staff to come in on a holiday. I genuinely wanted it to be perfect. Midway through dinner, her mother raised her glass and began talking about everything the restaurant had become. She talked about her vision, her persistence, her daughter's taste. She thanked her sister for emotional support during the hard years. She thanked the kitchen staff by first name, and then she said, and of course Calder helps out here and there, he's very good with computers, and moved directly into a toast before I could respond. Helps out here and there. Very good with computers. I held my wine glass and looked down at the table. My wife was laughing at something her cousin said. She didn't look at me. Not once. I didn't say anything. I told myself later it wasn't worth the scene. But that night, something shifted. Not dramatically. Quietly. The way a foundation cracks before the house knows it. Derek called me 2 weeks later. He'd run into someone who worked at the restaurant, a server named Priya who had pulled him aside at a mutual friend's birthday. She told him something she'd overheard during a meeting between my wife and her mother that she felt he should know. They were already talking to her cousin about taking over operations. The cousin had no restaurant experience, but he was family, and Priya had heard her mother say, once the systems are stable, we don't really need someone from outside the family running things day to day. Outside the family. I was her husband. I had been her husband for 3 years. But I was, apparently, outside the family. Derek met me for a drink that evening. He didn't say I told you so. He just sat across from me and asked one question. Do you have anything in writing? I thought about it for a long moment. The $340,000 wire transfer. The vendor contracts. The software accounts. The renovation invoices. All in my name. Nothing tied to ownership. Nothing tied to equity. Nothing that said I was anything other than a very well-resourced volunteer. And then something else started organizing itself in my mind. Because while my name wasn't on any ownership document, my name was on everything else. I didn't say anything to my wife. I didn't change my behavior at the restaurant. I kept showing up, kept managing, kept handling the Tuesday morning vendor calls and the Friday night rush and the monthly P&L that her mother didn't understand and never asked to learn. I watched. I took stock. And I called an attorney. Her name was Patricia Webb. Derek had used her 2 years earlier when a business partner had tried to exit a shared LLC without honoring the buyout terms. She had a small office near the Capitol, the kind of place that felt deliberately unintimidating. But her reputation was specific. She understood the financial architecture of small businesses better than most CPAs. I brought everything I had. Bank records showing the $340,000 transfer, a list of every digital account tied to my email, vendor contracts with my signature, software subscriptions linked to my credit card, the POS licensing agreement in my name, the reservation platform with my credentials as the account owner. She went through everything carefully. Then she looked up and said something that felt like a key turning in a lock I hadn't realized was there. You don't own the business, she said, but you own the nervous system. The restaurant could keep its name, could keep its liquor license, could keep its Instagram following and its tables and its regulars. But without the reservation system, the inventory platform, the vendor accounts, the POS infrastructure, it would be running blind, and every one of those things was mine. She asked me what I wanted to do. I sat there for a long time. I thought about my wife. I thought about the version of this marriage I had spent 3 years believing in. I thought about the woman at the fundraiser who had seemed so sure of herself, and whether any part of her had calculated from the beginning what I could be useful for. I told Patricia I didn't want to burn anything down. I told her I wanted what was fair. She nodded like she'd heard that before and said, "Fair is what the paperwork says." Let's talk about what your paperwork actually says. We talked for 2 hours. I left with a plan. I want to be honest about something here. The plan wasn't revenge, not in the way people usually mean that word. It wasn't about punishment. It was about clarity. It was about letting reality be what it actually was instead of what I kept performing it to be. My wife and her mother had already made their decision. They had decided I was a resource, not a partner. They had decided that once the restaurant was stable, I could be thanked and redirected and quietly moved out of the story they preferred to tell. All I was doing was deciding the same thing from my side. Over the next 3 weeks, I began making adjustments. Quietly, methodically, I updated the vendor contact information on 2 accounts, redirecting primary communications to a personal email I had set up separately. I documented every piece of infrastructure I had built, with timestamps and receipts. I contacted the reservation platform's customer support and verified that my credentials were the sole owner access for the account. I did the same with the inventory system. I also called the commercial real estate contact Derek had introduced me to earlier that year. There was a space 2 blocks away on South Congress that had been sitting empty for 4 months. A former gastropub, good kitchen infrastructure, street-level visibility. The asking price was reasonable. The bones were excellent. I signed a lease on it on a Tuesday morning before coming in to open the restaurant. Meanwhile, the text message sat in my phone like a low-level hum. Family-only management structure. I hadn't responded to it. My wife hadn't brought it up in person. Her mother had been unusually warm to me the last 2 weeks. The kind of warm that felt like someone who has already made a decision and is being gracious about the transition. I smiled back every time. I kept doing my job. Derek came by the new space with me on a Thursday evening after service. We stood in the empty dining room with a flashlight, him sweeping the beam across the ceiling, me already picturing where the bar would go. "You're really doing this," he said. "I already did it," I said. "They just don't know yet." He laughed. Then he asked if I was going to tell my wife before or after. I said I was going to let the situation explain itself. The timeline collapsed faster than I expected. Her mother called a family meeting at the restaurant on a Saturday afternoon before the dinner service. Present? Her mother, my wife, the cousin, who arrived with a notepad and the focused energy of someone who had been prepped for exactly this moment. I came in from the kitchen still in my chef's coat, which I now understood was theater on my part, but good theater. Her mother opened by thanking me for everything I had contributed. She used the word contributed the way people use it when they mean done with. She talked about a new chapter, about wanting the business to reflect true family ownership going forward. The cousin nodded along. My wife looked at the table. I let her mother finish. Then I asked one question. "Have you spoken with the reservation platform about transferring the account?" Her mother looked at the cousin. The cousin looked at my wife. My wife looked at me for the first time in the whole meeting. "We assumed that would be straightforward," her mother said. "It won't be," I said. "The account is mine. The vendor contracts are mine. The inventory system, the POS licensing, the delivery platform integration, all of it is registered under my name and my credit. None of it transfers without my authorization." The room went quiet in the particular way rooms go quiet when something everyone was pretending wasn't real suddenly is. Her mother's expression moved through several emotions very quickly. She landed on something that was trying to be composed but wasn't quite making it. "Your family," she said. "We expected you to act like it." I looked at her for a moment. Then I pulled out my phone and opened the text from my wife. The one from 3 weeks ago. I read it aloud. "We've decided to move forward with a family-only management structure." I looked up. "That's when I stopped acting like family," I said. "The moment you decided I wasn't." I stood up. I thanked them for the clarity, and I walked out. The calls started within the hour. My wife, 4 times. Her mother, twice. The cousin sent a text asking if we could talk business to business, which I found remarkable given that he had never run a business in his life. I forwarded everything to Patricia and didn't reply to any of it. What happened over the following week was not dramatic in the way I think they expected. There were no public scenes, no screaming matches, no social media posts, just the quiet, systematic reality of a business discovering that the infrastructure it had been built on was no longer available. The reservation platform locked them out when they tried to access it through the general manager login. Because the general manager login was mine and I had updated the recovery credentials the previous week. The inventory system required re-authentication. The primary vendor for their produce and proteins received the revised contact update and temporarily held orders pending confirmation. The POS system, when they tried to update the payment processing information without the master account credentials, flagged the attempt and suspended the terminal until verification could be completed. None of this was sabotage. Patricia had reviewed every step. These were systems I legitimately owned, and I was legitimately choosing not to continue operating them on behalf of a business that had told me I was no longer needed. Derek sent me a message on the third day. Priya just texted me. They can't get the Thursday reservations to sync. Her mother called the vendor, and the vendor didn't know who she was. I was sitting in my new space when I got that message. The contractors were finishing the bar installation, the kitchen equipment I had ordered, commercial range, proper ventilation, the under-counter refrigeration I had always wanted, was arriving the following Monday. I had spent 2 days quietly reaching out to staff from the restaurant, not recruiting, just letting them know I had an opening nearby if anyone was looking. 3 of them had already reached out back. I looked around the empty room, at the exposed brick I hadn't covered, at the Edison bulbs hanging on black wire, at the small chalkboard near the entrance where, for now, I had written only the name. My father had a phrase he used when I was growing up. Whenever I was wrestling with something I couldn't control, he'd say, "The only thing that's actually yours is what you built with your own hands." He ran a landscaping business in Ohio for 30 years. Not glamorous, not something that ever made the local news. But every client he had, he kept. Because he showed up exactly as advertised, every single time. I thought about him a lot during those weeks. I thought about what he would have said about the $340,000. I think he would have said I gave it willingly, which meant I couldn't be bitter about it. But I also think he would have said that giving something willingly doesn't mean letting someone pretend you never gave it. I sent my wife one message. It said, "I'm not taking anything that belongs to the restaurant. I'm simply not continuing to provide services I'm no longer wanted for. If you'd like to discuss the $340,000, I've asked Patricia Webb to handle that conversation. I wish you genuinely well." She didn't reply for 2 days. When she did, the message was long. It said I was being vindictive, that I was punishing her for wanting space, that this wasn't what marriage was supposed to look like. I read it carefully, once, and then asked Patricia to handle all further communication. The new restaurant opened on a Thursday evening 6 weeks later. Small, intentional, 40 covers, a focused menu, the kind I had always wanted to build. Not trying to be everything, just trying to be excellent at a few things done right. Derek came in for the first service and sat at the bar and ordered everything on the menu and told me afterward that the lamb was the best thing he'd eaten in Austin since moving here. At some point during that first week, Patricia called with an update. My wife's family had engaged their own attorney. There were conversations happening about the $340,000, about whether it constituted a marital asset or a business loan or a gift. Patricia was calm about all of it. She said, "This is exactly the kind of thing that takes time and patience." I told her I had both no, which I hadn't had in a long time. Priya came in for dinner one Friday with 2 of the other servers who had left the restaurant. They sat at a table by the window and ordered carefully and tipped exactly as much as people tip when they want you to know they're rooting for you. One evening, about 3 weeks after we opened, my wife walked in alone. She looked different from the woman who had sent me that text at 6:47 in the morning. Not smaller exactly, but less armored. She sat at the bar and looked around at the space for a long moment without saying anything. Then she said, "You built this fast." "I knew what I was doing," I said. "I've known for a while." She ordered a glass of wine. She didn't drink much of it. She said her mother was telling people I had stolen the restaurant's systems, which we both knew wasn't true, and I think she knew that I knew she knew it. "She wanted to protect the business from you," she finally said. "That's what she always told me." She said men walk into family businesses and walk out with half. She said never let that happen. I looked at her for a moment. So she protected the business from the person keeping it alive. She didn't answer that. I told her I wasn't interested in taking anything that wasn't mine. I told her the $340,000 was a conversation for attorneys. I told her I hoped the restaurant recovered, genuinely, because I had no interest in watching something I'd invested in fail. And then I told her something I had been thinking about for weeks. I spent 3 years making myself invisible so you and your mother could be visible. I told myself that was love. I think it was actually just fear of asking for what I deserved. That part wasn't your fault. But the message was, she looked at the bar top for a long time. Then she said, I should have put your name on things. You should have, I said. She left without finishing the wine. Derek stopped, and later that night after close, we sat at the bar after I'd sent the last of the kitchen staff home, and I poured us both something from a bottle I'd been saving for a moment that felt right. He looked around the room, at the chalkboard, at the framed photo of my father I had hung by the kitchen pass, at the empty tables that would be full again tomorrow. How do you feel? He asked. I thought about it honestly. I had lost a marriage, or something that had been performing as one. I had lost 3 years of income I was never going to fully recover. I had watched something I built get picked up and carried like it was never mine. Right until the moment they discovered they couldn't actually carry it without me. But I was sitting in a room I had built with my own hands. My name was on the lease. My name was on the vendor contracts. My name was on the sign outside Calder's. Nothing fancy, nothing that needed explaining. I feel like I'm in the right room, I said. He raised his glass. I raised mine. Outside, South Congress was doing what South Congress does on a Friday night, loud and lit and indifferent to anyone's quiet victories. I looked out at it for a moment through the glass I had cleaned myself before service, and for the first time in longer than I could clearly remember, I wasn't thinking about what someone else needed from me. I wasn't calculating how to make myself smaller so someone else could look larger. I wasn't holding up a structure that had never included my name on the foundation. I was just there, in my own place. Exactly where I had always been capable of being if I had stopped waiting for permission to build it. My father used to say the only thing that's actually yours is what you built with your own hands. He was right. It just took me a few years and a $340,000 lesson to fully understand what he meant.